Podcasters Roundtable round 125. Is your podcast launch freaking you out? Chill, man. Just chill out. Does it matter? We're going to even talk about that. Podcast launching. Like with this, welcome to the Podcasters Marketing Show. We're going to teach you how to
Oh,
grow to 1 million views just like that. No, actually, this is the Super Bowl Roundtable pre-show because
oh
we're
gosh.
streaming on a rare weekend. It's Saturday night. We're going crazy here. The Super Bowl is tomorrow. Obviously, we have nothing to do with the Super Bowl, but let's
Happy
meet the
sports ball, everyone.
happy sports ball. Let's meet the sporting roundtable. Co-host Dave Jackson, welcome back.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com.
Very cool. And not new to the roundtable. Welcome back, Emily.
Hi, Emily Prokop. I'm from the story behind podcast.com.
And if you were at podcastersroundtable.com/live or youtube.com/podcastersroundtable, you'd get to see Emily's very cool little set she's got. I mean, there's like a recording sign. There's like sparkly lights.
These are all covering the moving blankets because the moving blankets are really ugly, but they're great for podcasters.
I have one right here off camera that no one can see. Yes, you're right. They are not pretty, but they work very well. So
Yeah.
anyways, that's a good reason to go over and check out the video. Definitely subscribe. I think it was only like 2 rounds ago where I asked people to subscribe, and we're almost, that was to hit 600, and we're almost at 700, I think. So good job, Roundtable community. We're going towards that 1,000. We don't get anything. We get that. There should be a 1,000 plaque. I want the 1,000 plaque. It's like granite. All right, instead of platinum or whatever they give you. And new roundtable, I think, first time, Ginger.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. My name is Ginger Wiseman. I am the producer and co-host of the Outlander podcast, as well as the All Souls podcast, 2 fan podcasts that follow both book series and their television adaptations.
Very cool, and lots of success with that, as far as I know.
Yeah, it's been, I was telling someone who I didn't know knew that I had a show, kind of cornered me yesterday, and asked me, so I hear you have a podcast, and I was like, how do you hear, from whom? Because at certain places I'm not really advertising it, but in retelling that story of how it started and stuff we've done, yeah, it's kind of crazy that this journey over the last 5.5 years.
We've seen some like fairly cool stories from fan podcasts. Yeah. Like I feel like I always have kind of said that is the fastest way to sort of start and get potentially a good size audience, because they're built in, right? You got fans, like hardcore fans of a show, and you're going to give them more content around that show. And
exactly.
The beauty of a fan podcast is it's often better than any official podcast, because on official podcasts, a lot of times they can't talk about all the stuff that a fan podcast can talk about, right?
Yeah, and even if they have very strong opinions about certain things, they may not share those, because the whole point is, because they are associated with production, I don't want to say they have to toe party line, but absolutely, it's definitely much more sensitive as far as, they're being paid. Yeah. They have to go back to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so cool, because in a space where you feel like, oh, the major studios or something, they have an advantage. They have all the actors, access to them. But it does feel like the independent producer, the fan, actually has, in this case, more leverage, because I feel like they just have more freedom to discuss the things that fans actually want to talk about.
I would agree with that. And even if they're just starting out, like they're not podcasters and they're starting out in the space, but they are fans, let alone very knowledgeable fans of a certain show or book series, or whatever it is. Even if you're coming to that space, whether you're the first or the 8th podcast, the cool thing is, even with a potentially built-in audience, once you begin to engage, and once you enter that space as I kind of say, a slightly higher profile fan, because you are putting yourself out there, that community, for the most part, like the Red Sea parts, like, meaning they welcome you, they open you have such possibility for engagement in a well-established fandom.
Yeah, very cool. And so Well, congrats to us because we've already derailed. I didn't plan to talk about it. It wasn't on the list at all.
No, it wasn't.
We're on a perfect roundtable trajectory here, which I'm very proud of. In fact, we may be banned from YouTube at this point because apparently I said the super was a bowl. And
Sports ball.
Maybe
Sports ball.
trademark violation, and we know the bots are out to get us. So bring it on, shut us down. We'll just stay in the RSS feed where we're independent, do what we want. Nah,
you do not want to piss off podcasters.
No. Do not piss off the man with the microphone
No.
or the woman.
We have both today. We're very balanced today, right? Right down gender lines. I like it. We're split, so maybe we could like pair off and have a good debate on something. I don't know. Just making stuff up now. All right, let's get into, well, the title of this was, is your podcast launch freaking you out? Because a lot of people, when it comes to their launch, so when you start a podcast, you start thinking about, oh, well, this thing's about ready to go. You know, hopefully you've created a good show, right? It's you've got content that you think is going to be good, and you're ready to talk about it ad nauseum. Hopefully not all in one episode. And you're trying to figure out, well, when I put this on Apple Podcast or wherever else, Google, Spotify, how do I launch? Like, how do I get out to the most people? I got to have reviews. It has to do really well. So you start freaking out about it. And there was an article, and it was written by Matthew McLean, which I think I know a different one. Anyways, I don't think he's been on the Roundtable, but he did an article at thepodcasthost.com, which is done by Roundtabler Colin Gray, friend of the show there. And it was a cool article that says, does your podcast launch even matter? So very clickbaity title. It's perfect, right? Like that makes you go, what is, call something out. What does that mean? And so just a quote here from a section of the article. This is when you'll want to read this one, and the links will be in the show notes at podcastersroundtable.com/125, because there's a lot there. But I like this part where he talks about the areas of launching we see a lot of focus on are getting into podcast charts and getting as many reviews as possible. And people are saying stuff like, I need to get this podcast launch absolutely perfect is a commonly heard phrase. But what's the thinking behind that, right? So a podcast launch isn't like the launch of a film or the latest iPhone or a game console. Those things need to come out flying out of the gate with high sales and amazing feedback. Your podcast does not, which I thought was very important because, and granted, people starting a new podcast, they don't know. You don't know. You think, oh, I do need to, if I'm going to be successful, I need to be in new and noteworthy, whatever that means. We could talk about that. It doesn't mean anything. You don't have to worry about it. But these are the things you might have heard when you've been trolling around trying to figure out how to do podcasting. And it just feels that way. You feel like, oh, if my book doesn't reach number one on Amazon, it's not going to do sales, and then they're not going to ask me for another book deal. But in podcasting, there's no one really to shut you down, and you have sort of infinite amount of time to grow. Now, of course, there are use cases where it's like you might be doing it for a business or a company, and you need to show immediate results, and maybe there are some different considerations there, and he goes into this in the article. But I'm curious with the people here, the Roundtablers, did you do anything special for launch? And you think back to your first podcast and you thought, I need to get this out to the world, right? So 2 laughs. I think Emily and Ginger both laughing. So Ginger, since you're the first time Roundtable, why don't you tell us, okay, it seems like in your case, your launch is kind of important because you're sort of following a show. So don't you need to be found like as quick as possible?
It's the short answer is I don't know if anyone ever put the word launch and podcast together in 2013 when we started. I had never heard about it, and I'd been a fan of podcasts since 2008. So as now a 10-year listener, I get the feeling it's kind of a more recent need.
So what was your concern was it just getting it published, period?
I think so. It was, I knew I had from a previous a professional incarnation, I knew I had the skills that I needed to edit audio. Like that's all I knew. And everything else we would be able to find out. We found a host, made a quickie website, just the minimal things. And our thought was, we'll be happy if our parents listen, So we didn't have, and also we realized rather quickly within 2 episodes that the show we were there to talk about it had just been announced that summer. It was going to take another 10 to 12 months for it to premiere. So when we're a year early, we're like, well, let's twiddle our thumbs. Thankfully, there's a book series, so we started covering the book series. But yeah, we had absolutely, there was no need, perceived or otherwise, of anything around the word launch.
Were you focused on Apple and reviews and rankings or anything like that?
No, I mean, to me, a success was, let's record, let me edit, let's get it up. And I think seeing it in Apple, at the time, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, to me, that was success, because that was all I knew, is I wanted to see it there.
For sure. How about you, Emily?
For both shows, my first show and this one, I did kind of quiet launch with both of them, because I get nervous about putting myself out there. And I was even nervous today recording episode like 140 of The Story Behind. I'm still nervous about putting myself out there into the world. And even though Dave can tell me over and over and over again, putting your show on Apple Podcasts is like putting your name in a phone book, it scares me that my name's in a phone book. I don't like it. I'm kind of a private person. So the fact that I'm doing a podcast and that I want listeners as well, I still kind of need that privacy. So my launch was kind of quiet. And it was funny with The Story Behind. One of my listeners from my first podcast was the one who found it. He saw that I had put it up early, and he started showing the link off on Twitter, like, Emily's new show is out, you guys. I'm like, no, what are you doing? I'm like, I had tweets scheduled. Like, what are you doing to me?
Yeah. So at work, we had one show that we relaunched, which essentially it had been like 7 years. It had been like on hiatus for 7 years, and we relaunched it. And I felt a little bit pressure to launch it and get it out and grow it to at least what it had been. But I set goals. Like, I had to tell my organization, hey, within 6 months, we're going to be at 1,000 downloads per episode, whatever it was, right? Yeah. And things that sometimes an organization says we need to see measurable results. And so I was setting goals that I knew I had already assessed how many people were still sort of keeping active, like so attached to the feed. I didn't set a goal that I knew I couldn't hit, right? All right. So it was a little higher, and I knew, hey, I can grow a podcast by a few hundred downloads per, on average. So I did set a goal, and I paid attention, but in terms, I would say we went to all the normal places. Like, we have a Facebook page that is, has a ton of people on it. So I knew there were places that I could go where the audience was. So really my only focus was not about like, am I showing up in the charts in Apple? Although in that case, when you are dealing with an organization that's sort of hands off, it does not hurt to take a picture and show, hey, we are number 6, right? In our niche. Means nothing, but it is sort of that social proof to people who are not necessarily embedded in the space. But for me, it was about, getting people back to the show they had been listening to, trying to reconnect with those people, and then just leveraging the platforms we already had. So my launch was really focused on just using resources to get in front of them. It wasn't any more worried than that. Dave, when you're helping people launch shows, what's that discussion? What do you guys talk about? People must come to you and say, man, we got to make this launch, has to be big, right?
It's got to be big. It's got to be. And I always say to them, are you married? In many cases they are. I'm like, great. Did you have a big wedding? And they go, yes, I did. Okay. So I said, do you see where having a big wedding does not always mean an easy marriage? It still takes a lot of work. Like, that's where the work really starts, is once the wedding is over. Even though you had all your friends and everybody came in and went, yay, wedding, yay. I'm like, the real marriage starts when you get home. And it's the same thing with a launch. You can get everybody and their brother to come help you launch, but the real start, the work, like dig out the shovels and let's go to work, is when the launch is over. And I don't really think in the same way that there are people that get married at the courthouse that have really happy marriages, and there are people that have $10,000 weddings and they get divorced in 6 weeks. So I don't think the launch has a lot to do with it. I think now, with that asterisk, don't blow it off. Do everything you can to get your friends and your family and the website and do everything you can. What just breaks my heart is when somebody goes, yeah, I did. I did the whole thing, but we didn't get into new and noteworthy. So, and they'll come to me and they're like, so do I do I relaunch it under a different name? Should I change the name? Is the name wrong? Well, what's your show about? It's about chocolate. What's it called? The name of the show is Chocolate. And I'm like, oh, I think that's a pretty good name. If it's like, it's not the name, it's not this, it's just a matter of, oh, and then they'll go, well, I only had 200 downloads. And I'm like, okay, that's 10 classrooms. It's 10 classrooms of people have tuned into you to listen. So it's kind of interesting. I'm doing a thing right now where am I back?
Yeah, I'm back. You're back. Someone's back.
Okay. I'm doing a thing right now, probably at the end of February. I'm doing a secret podcast right now. I'm purposely not launching it to see how much traffic do you get just by being in the directories. And the current answer is right now, not much. So being in Apple and Stitcher and all the other ones isn't really, again, going to get you a lot of stuff. It's getting into your community, getting all your friends and family to point to it.
I think it's key too that like you said, and the article mentions this, like don't just brush it off. Like there are things to consider, right? Like I said, we had a current audience, and if you have like an email list, I mean, there's all like best practice stuff you want to do. Like make sure you tell the people who would be interested and that you're connected to that you have a podcast. Certainly make your website friendly to that podcast. I still go to websites and people who sign up for this show, and then I go to a website and I was like, you have a podcast, right? I mean, the whole point is to be on this show is like you're a podcaster, and it's there, but it's not there. Like I can't find it, and I kind of know how to look for those things. So make sure when you launch, people actually can find your show. Put your best foot forward. Like make your best effort to be discoverable, but don't freak out when the floodgates don't open and you have massive subscribes. In fact, it's those subscriptions that will move you up the charts, but we've talked about it several times on this show. First of all, it doesn't take a ton of subscriptions to move you up a chart, but being up there is not going to do much for your show. And like Dave says, in the beginning, you could go out with a bang, but we're such a long game. Like it doesn't matter if you start with 100, 500, at some point that initial thing is going to stop. And in fact, a lot of those people might peel off and you're going to have to build them back up. So the listeners you get over time are more of like the real listeners that are going to be around, but also focus on that. Even if it's a small group, try to focus on those early listeners. Those are some of your most hardcore. They're going to be your longest time fans. They're going to be big like advertisements for your advocates. Yeah, for your podcast. They're going to go out and tell other people. And that is exactly what's going to grow your show. It's funny because Stephanie, is it Stephanie? Yeah, Stephanie, who's in China right now in the morning, she said that her marriage was so much easier than her podcast launch. Which is funny.
But yeah, I did a thing recently where I have people list what their favorite podcasts are. And I went to the shows that, like, if Ray said, hey, I really like the story behind, well, I would go to Emily's site and say, hey, Ray listed you as his favorite. Congratulations at the 4-minute mark or whatever. And I was amazed that the bigger the show, the harder it was to contact people, to the point of being really like, have fun getting a hold of anybody at Gimlet. It was like, forget about it. It's like a walled garden. And so to me, when we are, quote, little, we're smaller, we're just launching, that's where, like Ray said, those people that say, hey, I really like the show, I'm so glad I found it, definitely email that person and say, what would you like to hear on the show? I'm so glad you like it, because that's your kindling. If you get those people going, they're like, and I mean, we all know that that I know that we're just people, but we're also the host. And when the host emails you, it's like, oh my gosh, Ray Ortega emailed me. And then we're all spastic and happy. And we tell people then that Ray Ortega emailed me.
I had that reaction when I was emailing podcast hosts in the early days and they got back. I mean, the point is, people don't really know who's on the other side of that. And you are the host. Like, you're someone that someone has chosen to tune into on a regular basis. And when people respond, it's awesome. It's funny because I don't think I tweeted it out, but just the other day I was thinking, what I really love about as my YouTube channel grows and gets bigger is that the reaction when I answer a comment gets more, the person is more surprised every time. So the bigger you are, it's sad that people are surprised when you respond to them, but it's like low hanging fruit, man. Like, not only do I want to answer the question, but when you do, people are like, I didn't even expect you to answer. People just put questions into the ether, not expecting to get a response. So, you know, make sure you're paying attention to like every piece of feedback, because one thing podcasters will definitely tell you, it's actually hard to get feedback. So definitely pay attention to that. But I'm curious. So because we know that the launch is not necessarily the thing that's really going to determine the success or the growth of your podcast, really, you can get a little nice start to it, but it has nothing to do with the overall growth of your podcast. I'm curious, where do you guys see the most growth coming from in your podcast? So Ginger, if I don't even know if that's something, you know, we don't necessarily track that, but just as a sort of anecdotally, like, where do you see the most growth coming from?
Well, I can describe a pattern we've noticed.
Yeah.
We've now covered 4 seasons of Outlander and done read-alongs for the first 4 books. We're about to start our 5th. And the patterns we've noticed, like without fail, every single time, is that I don't know if it's the subscriptions themselves. It very well may be, but the listens it takes a week or 2 to get into to the season. Like once we start covering the actual TV show, by episode 2 of that new season, it really cranks up, and our weekly, or within our either 24 or 48 or 1 week out download numbers are huge in comparison to maybe our 1 week, 2 day, 1 week, 24 hour, 48 hour, 1 week download numbers out of, say, an average episode when the TV show is not on the air. So I would say, because we do cover the TV show, that definitely brings in a ton more interest.
Yeah. Dave, what do you see correlating to any kind of growth like that? Like, I mean, that's a very specific case. Like, you've got something going, so people are searching, people are actively watching. I do the same thing with Westworld, which is an interesting thing. With Outlander, can you binge it? Or is it... when the season is, so you have to, so that's good for you, because you would definitely see spikes.
It's interesting. I'm glad you said that, because our second show, which is the All Souls podcast, follows the All Souls trilogy, which season 1 was just premiered in the US, and it was dropped all at once. And so the difference in how we attack that is worlds apart, because no one's waiting to watch. Everyone's like, give me all the episodes, and they're waiting for us. Where's your next episode? Where's your next episode? I'm like, well, you know, we're human. We do what we can, and we're getting them out, but it's completely different.
So do you have to think about dropping like the whole season's reviews like at one time?
In a perfect, well, you know, it's an option. I think, because unfortunately Outlander was literally finishing its season when All Souls when Discovery was dropped. We didn't have that option. I mean, we did get screeners, so we could have done it a little earlier, but there was so much going on, and we have a weekly show that the turnaround is so short. So ideally, maybe I can see if a show is bingeable, maybe to drop all at once if you can. But a lot of people who do listen to our second podcast are fans of our first. So they kind of know, number one, they know our past pattern of productivity. And they also know that we have the 2 shows. So it's kind of a twist. It's a twisted thing. It's a very specific set of circumstances right at this moment. But it's very interesting that the second show we cover is bingeable.
Yeah, and I think that with podcasting, when you're talking about something that's fairly niche, like on this show, we try to apply things to all podcasters, but there are definitely like these things that are specific to different types of shows, and you're kind of seeing that with a fan podcast. I mean, Emily, you have multiple shows, right?
I have a few shows. I do The Story Behind, which is a extraordinary history of everyday objects, and I have Hate to Wait, which is following me and John Buchanan on our weight loss journeys.
Right. So what I'm thinking, related to this topic about launching, everyone here has more than one show. Did the second show, was there any different consideration when launching a second podcast? Did you use your first podcast? Maybe they don't tie in at all. Like, I don't know, when you launched the second one, because as Ginger's sort of saying, a lot of fans of their other show are fans of the first show. So you're going to have some carryover. So I'm curious how that factors into any kind of announcement or launch of a new podcast, a second podcast or third podcast.
Yeah. Well, because I had a show similar to the story behind before the story behind, I was able to tack on a show at the end of that feed that said, Emily is starting her own show. Here's a preview of it. Now, the story behind is very short. So the preview wasn't like what some of the bigger companies do, where they just throw an entire 40-minute episode into the feed. This was an 8-minute show, and it was just to give a preview. If you like it, go find the story behind on your podcatcher of choice and go subscribe. So that was nice. I had some crossover there between history and weight loss. There's not a lot of crossover, but there's still some.
Certainly you have an audience that's open to anyone. So everyone, has maybe, I mean, those are like personal goals of people, right? So like that can apply to anyone in the audience, really. So, and I'm wondering, do you know if that was effective at all, or just you kind of put it out there and you don't really know?
Think so. And also John has a following of his own too, and so we brought people in. With that though, we're not as big marketing. It was more a show for us, and that's how we started with it. So when people find it out of nowhere and we have a question in our Facebook group, when people want to join us, how did you hear about this Facebook group? And it's always because of the podcast. And I'll message John and be like, do you know this person? Oh my gosh, this is a stranger to us. We don't know who this is or where they came from. And it's amazing. And we love it.
The craziest thing about this show is that at the end, one of the best parts about being on this show is that we hang out after the recording with each other for like a good half hour and just talk, right? And I wish we could record those because that's where some of the best conversations. So sorry, everyone. At some point we have to turn it off. But it's amazing to me that at the end there will be people who join us and be like, man, check it off the list. Like, I couldn't wait to meet Dave and finally be on this show. And I'm like, why do we not know who you are? Like, you've just been out there, huge fan, and you don't know who you are. So there probably needs to be some more effort to like really dig in to like find the audience. That can be a hard thing, right? Some people, the silent majority is typically what's out there, right? You might hear the squeaky wheel who says, Ray, you talk too much and let other people talk. I'm like, yeah, it's my show, whatever. But you don't hear the rest of everyone else. So it's interesting. It's interesting. You want to definitely get in touch as much as you can with that other audience. Because again, they're just people who love the stuff. And that's kind of my point. Like, where do you see the most growth? In this article, they said when they asked the question, I guess they did like a little poll. You want to find a new podcast to listen to. What do you do first? Only 6% of respondents took to the podcast charts to find their next show to binge. And it said, in fact, the 3 areas that relied on tech to provide podcast recommendations were the 3 least popular ones. Google search made up 12% of overall response, while searching podcast listening apps directories was a lowly 16%. Add these all together, and they're still way short of the most popular way of discovering podcasts. 43% of listeners would take to social media or online communities to ask other listeners for recommendations. And again, we see where word of mouth is still like the biggest thing, whether that's another podcast mentioning you, Dave saying it on his show that the Roundtable exists. I do that too. And the email sign up list for this show, podcastersroundtable.com/guest, if you want to be on, it says, how did you find it? It's not a required question, but almost everyone answers it. And you get incredible insights because most people will say, School of Podcasting, YouTube. YouTube is an interesting way that podcasts have been found for me, but people will tell you, and most often they heard it from somewhere else. It's not that they found you. I don't know if anyone's ever responded like, you were a featured podcast in the app, or I found you in the charts or something. No one ever answers that.
Yeah, you were the first result in Google when I was first looking up how to podcast, was Podcasters Roundtable. And I remember saying that and Daniel J. Lewis getting really bad. He's just like, they were first.
And you know what's funny about that too is I never know how to take those because oftentimes it's like specific to you, right? It's not like we were first overall. We were first to you and like your searches. So you're like, yes, and you're like, nah. It just happens that like Emily had happened to like check out me before she Googled Roundtable.
Yeah.
Something weird like that, right? So Daniel, it's okay, man. You're probably still way first.
But that's why you should do things with quote your competition, because I have a fair amount of people that say, like, I'll say, how did you find me? They're like, oh, I heard you on the Roundtable, and then I decided to you seem to know what you're talking about, so I came over to check you out.
Awesome. All right, well, sweet. We're halfway through. We've hit one article and like a rat hole we went down. So we are dialing in this Roundtable. We're on track. Now we need to pick out another story. I will not pick out. That was one that I had. Ginger. It's funny because we've had crossover. Dave mentioned Gimlet, and there's news there. I don't want to talk about it too much. We might mention it. About the Spotify potential purchase of Gimlet. And then we have, we just mentioned that tech is often not the way people are finding podcasts. Just listen app to match listeners to podcasts. So which one do you want to talk about, Ginger?
Oh gosh.
Put you on the spot. Which one did you like more?
When I was going to look for things, I wasn't looking for things like news announcements, like the Spotify thing. I was looking for not issues, but parts of the industry or latest developments, but not anything that was this.
I don't enjoy news that much because it often doesn't apply for longer than a week.
Exactly.
And so I always want to pull out the nugget. So we can talk about anything, and then we can figure out how it applies to podcasters.
Okay, so the Just Listen app was in the article was likened to like a dating app.
Yeah, like swipe left to listen to this if you like this podcast.
And I thought it was an interesting idea. But then as I was going through and reading it, what it explained about, if I remember correctly, is the person who had used it said that whereas the first guest or the first show that was presented to them had a high production value and quality. It was pretty enjoyable, but it seemed it was very highly produced, and it seemed something that was general or generic enough to be able to apply to or be liked by a somewhat broad audience. But then the next time that person went in or listened to another episode of that same suggested podcast, it was a miss. And so I thought it's interesting, what kind of algorithms is this app, or would these types of app use? Because if they use something quite general out of the gate, how does that really truly help? Because that, to me, that wouldn't be getting the best data. You'd almost want to be slightly controversial out of the gate, or choose something very definitive that would not maybe apply to everyone, so you can start getting more niche for that person and have the app thus really bring you added value.
To me, this is one of those things where, like, I feel like, Dave, we've seen a lot of tech that tries to help with discovery, but it's like, who's using the tech? Like, why would you go to an app to find a pod? I mean, it's just hard. Like, it's going to be hard for an app to bubble up to the surface where enough people are using this thing and discovering mass amounts of podcasts. Plus, podcasts they're not sampleable. It's like, it is very hard. It's not like, see a person. Nope. Yep. Right. Like, or even, Instagram, just, I see a picture and I know whether I want to go further. But a podcast, like, which section of the podcast are you going to give me? The first 45 seconds were like, welcome to episode 125 of the Podcasters Roundtable. Today we're talking to Dave, Emily, and like, shut up. What's the content here, right? I hate intros, by the way. Dave, I mean, what do you think? An app?
Yeah, it's one of those things that when I hear the discovery thing, I think it was Elsie on the feed was saying that we've had discovery problems in every, like, books are hard to discover, and it's hard to find a good TV show, and it's hard, and usually it's the same thing. People are like, oh, like I just watched You, as in YOU, on Netflix. It's really creepy and really good. And how did I find out about it? Because a friend of mine had said, oh, you're on Netflix? I'm like, yeah, I'm out of things to binge. Oh, you have to watch this show. I watched the first episode, got sucked in, and that was it. So that, which is kind of funny, because Netflix, an app, used to be very good at saying, oh, well, you watch this show, you should watch this. And now there's so much on Netflix, of which apparently I think I could get my own comedy special at this point. It's like that. And I don't know about you, but the album art, I can't tell, like when they put things in front of me, like what it is, unless it's, I don't know. It just, I get confused now when I go into Netflix, and I don't trust the recommendations anymore because they're just not as good. The overall content isn't as good.
And see, I'm glad that you said that You is creepy, because I don't like creepy or scary things, but the picture keeps coming up and I'm just like, well, what is this? But I don't want to click on it because I don't want creepy. But see, you told me, and now I'm like, oh, nope. Okay, great. I can pass on that.
Yeah, it's like if John Mayer was a secret murderer kind of thing.
Nope.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's funny because you said books, like every medium, like movies, like how do you find what movie to watch? Some people might use like Rotten Tomatoes, and that's like a service. It might go there. Oftentimes, movies is still a weird one because there's not that many out at any given time for new stuff. That's what's being promoted. It's not like we all hear about the newest podcast. In fact, there's probably too many podcasts coming out all the time. But with books, you know, I subscribe to like a Goodreads newsletter, and that's just a newsletter. I mean, I don't know that I've really seen a newsletter for podcasts that sort of says, hey, these have launched this week. That actually, Dave, you probably have a domain we can use for that, right? I think we should start that newsletter. Seriously.
Well, the other thing, I was watching Tim Schmoyer, who's a YouTuber, and he brought up a really good point. He said, when you turn on the TV, it's on. Something will start automatically. When you turn on the radio, something comes out. When you fire up a podcast app, nothing starts automatically. And so this is where your titles really come into play, so that people go, ooh, how to make $1 million in 30 seconds. Click, or whatever it is, or, you know, some sort of title that's going to catch people's eye and make them want to click. And I see this probably about once a month, where let's say I launch the Dave Jackson Show, and the first episode is called The Dave Jackson Show, and the second episode is called The Dave Jackson Show. Not even like episode 1, episode 2. They just keep using it over and over and over. And I'm like, how are you going to share that? You need to go listen to The Dave Jackson Show. Great. Which episode? It's like, who's on first? It's like, no, it's the one called The Dave Jackson Show. I know, but which one? So your titles are, I've been banging this gong for a while. Your titles are really, really important, and don't overlook those. Back to Ray.
I was doing the once a show uncomfortable silence thing to see if someone would just sort of jump in. I heard I didn't know Emily was going to say something, but she's like, no, I'm not going to say anything. All right. Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I would. It's so weird because the people who are going to take to an app, I mean, the app would have to just be super popular, and I'm not sure why it would get that way for enough people to be using it. A, for the app to survive, and B, for it to really produce results that you can say, oh man, if you can get your featured in this, if you get listed in this app, people are going to find your podcast.
Well, the other one they mentioned in there was scout.com, which you can actually pick genres that you like, which makes much more sense than just, hey, you could listen to anything. That's terrifying to me. If I turned on the TV and knowing that like any channel could be playing, and I have kids and I'm like, what? I don't know what this is. Okay, Scout. Yeah. Non-explicit. Great. That's what I want. I want to be able to pick knowledge, trivia, history. Don't give me true crime. No. Too scary. But yeah, the other one that they mentioned in there, scout.com, I don't know. We'll see.
Well, this is what Pandora is in theory going to try to do, right?
Yeah.
They're going to use the system that Pandora's always used, which is, you know, just put in front of you via their amazing algorithm to know what you want to hear. And I will say, they are inside my head. They oftentimes know what I want to hear. They're going to try to do this for podcasts. But again, I think there's something unique to podcast, and they're just not easy to sample, that you can't just know in the first few seconds. do I want to listen to the show? Yeah, you might know immediately, if a host is like, well, hey, welcome, you're like, nope, but for most podcasts, you're like, what is this about? Again, we've talked about this here, and I think maybe it was Paul Colligan had some good ideas about how this could work really well in that, you can select your genre or your interest, like it'll know certain things and hopefully introduce you to stuff that you might be interested in. And are they filtering themselves? Like, are they making any kind of judgments on what is good versus what is not? I don't know.
The one thing that I like about Netflix is you do have the ability to go in and take something out of your history, because Netflix has a really Spotify. Spotify. I love every week they have like, here's your weekly based on what you've listened to songs that we think you're going to like. Well, I haven't listened to this for a while. And in December, I went through and made a playlist of all these old Christmas songs. So I go to my playlist and Spotify is like, here's the next song from Andy Williams. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, and I don't know that there's a way I can go into my history in Spotify and go, okay, yeah, that was just in December. I don't need Andy Williams or Harry Belafonte or Doris Day. Like, can we go back to the Creed and, Ted Nugent and whatever, Disturbed, whatever I want to listen to? It's very bizarre. So there are times when the app picking for you is not good. That's like on Netflix when the one time you're like, wait, what was that Madonna movie? Oh, Desperately Seeking Susan. And then like for the next week, they're like, here's another Madonna movie. And you're like, no, I was just doing research.
Yeah. When I was only on free Pandora for like years, it was super. I was like, don't let anyone else log on to your Pandora, because if you thumbs up and thumbs down wrong, you're going to mess up my channel bad.
Yeah.
And now that I pay for it, it's like, I don't care. Just skip. I'm like, oh, I forget the thumbs down. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, there's something cool about the free version where it's like, this channel is very curated. It took me years to get the right things. So I will be interested to see their approach and if it even works. But I think, we're going to talk about this forever about podcast discovery and do we need help?
What was nice was Clamor, when it was in its infancy, was actually kind of a nice way to find new podcasts, because people
what worked about it? Yeah.
Well, because they could pick exactly which clip they wanted people to listen to.
Right. You picked them. It was a pain because the producer had to do it. But this is marketing, right? This is marketing your show. So if you took the time to put the clip in there. Dave, you had a Clamor podcast, didn't you, Dave?
I did. The Clamor Top 20.
Clamor Cast? What was it called?
The Clamor Cast. That was it. Clamor on, Dave. Yes. It was interesting. I didn't like that show because I had no control over the content. The guys would actually run a thing and say, here's the top 20, things that were most clamored. And it was like, wow, that was somebody who must have had a robot going, because that was a really stupid clip. So I was not sad to see that one go away.
All right. We've talked about like podcasts on music platforms and hinted at a little bit. We will approach this. Spotify may purchase the Gimlet network for like, I don't know, like $230 million or something crazy like that. But I'm more curious, and does this have any real effect? I don't think for most of us it does not. But overall for podcasting, there are things we don't know. And by the time you listen to this, we might know them. So that's why we have to be careful about how much we focus on like current events. But is it an exclusive deal, right? So like, I'm more curious. Do you think, how does locking shows into a single distributor? So if like all Gimlet shows were on Spotify only, even if they were free, at that point, is it even a podcast? If you can't get it via RSS, right? I mean, it's not really a podcast, right? But what do we think that it has an effect of like big shows sort of breaking off, and you're seeing this like original content. All these platforms want to have their own original content, so they're buying up stuff that's already doing well. In this case, I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? Is this good for podcasting? If the Gimlet network goes over there, does it matter? Is there any upside, downside to it? I see some upside.
Well, I would think if they put out $230 million for a product, they're then going to put out, a fair amount of budget to make people then come listen to it. And so I hope when they get there, they'll accidentally find my show while they're at it. The business side, if you're like, why would they pay $230 million? Because there's no royalties on a podcast. So when you run an ad against a music song, whatever they pay them, 0.0002 cents or whatever it is. But when you run it against a podcast, I don't get the 0.002 cents that a musician gets because there's no mechanical rights, there's no royalties or anything like that. So in theory, podcasts are cheaper to sell because there's no royalties. So my question would be that I go, man, $230 is a lot of, like, how many plays would that be for a musician to equal 230 million that you're not going to have to pay those guys? And then I'm with you, Ray. It makes me think they're going to make it exclusive like they did with Amy Schumer and Joe Biden. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I see the good thing where, hey, this might bring more people to Spotify, but we're going to end up like, I don't know about you, when I have an Amazon Fire TV, and when I go there, I'm like, wait, where was I watching that show? Was that on Hulu or Netflix or was it on Amazon? And there have been times when I'm like, I could have sworn that, or is it on HBO Go? And I'm like, I can't remember where I was watching that.
There are shows I just don't watch if it's not on the platform I already have. Like I just will say, not doing it. And the hardest part is getting someone hooked, right? If you got me hooked, and then maybe I was, if I am listening to a property, I mean, like, Pod Save America is a show that I listen to, and they got on HBO, and I don't have HBO, but trust me, I found ways to get HBO. Like I was like, oh, I'll do the HBO Go for a month because I want to see this show I'm already into. So, if with Gimlet, they're going to bring over a lot of people, but then any new people are probably only going to come from Spotify. If it's locked in that platform, it's going to be harder to drag people into a Spotify subscription. But, for Spotify, I mean, Gimlet is a hit maker. If they tried to do that on their own, it would probably cost them more, and they might not do it. They know what they're getting when they purchase the shows in a network. And I would think that it's a lot of acquisitions like this. They buy them kind of like Instagram with Facebook. You buy the team and let them still keep doing what they're doing. So I would think, but as Gimlet, you're just like, we cashed out. Like, how? I don't know how that works. Like, do we continue to get paid after you pay us once? Like,
yeah, because they have ads and they have ads in those episodes. So how does that work?
Do they? Maybe Spotify wants those advertisers as well. They're buying all of that, right? I don't know.
It'd be fun to watch. See what happens.
Well, I'm still watching iHeartMedia, which bought Stuff Media. So
that's right.
Stuff You Should Know. And I'm waiting to see, because iHeartMedia, they're still in trouble, right? They're not technically bankrupt, but they're kind of on the trajectory.
I thought they had remedied that situation.
Most media companies are always on the brink.
Yeah,
that's true.
So
it's one of those things that, okay, well, why did iHeart buy Stuff You Should Know? And they're not doing it. They're not making that exclusive. And hopefully Spotify will do the same thing with Gimlet. So,
yeah, being exclusive, I mean, you can't imagine that they wouldn't be exclusive, because what are you buying at that point?
Here's a question. How many of you listen to a Gimlet show?
Ironically, I mean, Startup was the only one I listened to.
Yeah, I listened to Start. Yeah.
But I haven't, not since then. I guess Spotify's also purchasing. I mean, if Gimlet properties and they make hit shows, the next thing they're going to make is probably going to be heard by a lot of people. Then it's brought to you by Spotify, right? So they're getting their name into a place that reaches a lot of people, maybe outside their platform. And that could be one thing that they're paying for as well.
They're also bringing in the quality, which I don't think they're going to say to anybody else on their platform who's submitting their podcast, you have to up your quality because we have Gimlet. So your podcast, but it's kind of a nice incentive of just like, hey guys, maybe get a better mic that everyone has their own. I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
Crazy talk.
Great. I know. One is fine for 5 people.
that we hand around and have no stabilizer for.
Oh, no. You put it in the middle of the table and
Oh,
you all
Lord.
stand way back
Yeah.
in the kitchen.
Oh, while touching the table, like
Yep.
Yeah,
With the
it's-
ice cubes going.
Yeah.
oh
And
god,
a lot of pens that click.
yes, and slurping your drink. Oh god, yeah.
Oh man, I thought I was just waiting. I was going to let
That's a
that
hit
go.
show right there.
If that kept going for 40 minutes, I would have let it go. I would have let
See,
that go as
SP in
long.
the chat's calling me out. Okay, I started with a rock band mic and then I upped my game. Come on.
Ah.
That's funny. So anyways, we don't know if it's going to happen. I mean, for us, it's more attention to podcasting. So
Yes.
congrats. I mean, Gimlet, the only people it may not be good for is Spotify because they're going to spend the money. Gimlet's going to get their money. And we're going to get attention on podcasting because, hopefully for either Spotify or for Gimlet, kind of like Google Podcast, it won't be a shiny new toy that then they forget about in 6 months, right? When another toy comes along. And that was Chris, I think it's iChris, at iChris on Twitter, Chris Ends. He said that, Spotify obviously doesn't care about podcasts the way that Gimlet does. Gimlet started, they have a true passion for what they do. So hopefully it doesn't affect what they're doing there with podcasts.
It would be nice if I didn't think about that. Maybe having Gimlet come on board, maybe Spotify would actually fix some things that they should fix when it comes to podcasting.
Like
Better
what?
show notes, Spotify, if you're listening. Better show notes.
Yeah, better show notes and quit hosting everybody's files and just let them pass through.
I thought they were going to do that. Pass through.
That was a big rumor, and I heard it was a big rumor for February. So we got another 27 days.
Why don't you
6 days.
tell the Roundtable audience why that's important to you?
Oh God, because when you make a mistake and there's 20 seconds of blank space, and let's say you're using, I don't know, a normal host, Blueberry, Libsyn, Spreaker, whatever, you upload the same name file and poof, it's gone. Except on Google Play Music because they make a copy, and Spotify. So now if you want that file to be updated everywhere, you have to upload a differently named file. So that means now for the next 24 hours-ish, when people click play on Apple Podcasts, it's not going to work because your feed hasn't officially kind of updated and it's still pointing at the old file that doesn't exist. But now Spotify will update, at which point I go over and say, let's look at the Spotify stats. Let's look at the Apple stats. You know what? I'm going to leave the 20 seconds of silence in Spotify for those people as a collector's item. But
Collector's item. Special edition podcast episode.
yeah. So if they got rid of that, that would be a really good thing. And if somebody please take Google Play Music, or at least podcasting in Google Play Music, and take it out behind the barn and just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Just
pull the
old
trigger.
Yeller that Google Play.
Exactly.
Hey, Google Plus, come on. At this point, I'm just happy that they keep Hangouts, but because Google Plus is being taken out behind the barn.
I heard a rumor they're getting rid of Hangouts.
You're the first? What are you talking about?
I have a Pixel. We hear things.
Pixel. Oh, we're gonna discontinue your Pixel.
No, the Hangouts app. Yeah.
So, I think Hangouts on Air is maybe the only
I
successful
think
thing
that's
that's come
separate, but
out of. Yeah, that's all I
yeah,
care
but the
about.
messaging app they make it right.
Hangouts itself. So it's weird because it's all morphed. Google's so confusing. You never know what's working, what's broken, what's going to continue. But
he doesn't mean it.
He
It's okay.
doesn't mean it. I have no Google products in here. Anyways, I'm not. I just love tech, so I'm not offended. See, this is on YouTube, so no one will ever see this round. I get bot revenge. But Hangouts on Air seems to be the only successful thing that came out of that sort of Google Plus experiment. I mean, we had an amazing podcast community there. It's funny because you're killing Google Plus. This is a classic Roundtable rat hole we've just fell down. But they're killing Google Plus because it didn't have enough activity. But I know the podcast community was just super active. So there weren't enough of those apparently. You should have had I guess Facebook fan page for your podcast is the better route than Google Plus fan page.
I think it's not relevant to podcasting, but it's Google related. As you said, they have a history of getting rid of things that, you know, a good number of people are using and fans of. And I still don't forgive them for getting rid of Google Reader.
Yeah, most people probably don't.
No.
I don't forget them for getting rid of iGoogle, which was my favorite homepage in the entire world. I loved it.
Yes, that too.
Oh.
And I just spent $45 on a Chromecast that is now being discontinued.
I really have a Chromecast that it just plugs in and stays hot, and I never use.
Yeah, and then I thought I could just connect my phone to my TV. I can if I buy an app that has a $5 subscription a month, and I was like, so I don't want to see Chromecast
Pandora
go away.
Subscription. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
I'm buying an app for that. All right. Hey, we still have time. I almost don't want to do this one because it feels like it'd be better at the front end of another round, but who cares? This was an article. Dan Meisner? How do you say that? He writes on, I don't know who he writes for, but he writes a lot about podcasting lately on Medium. And this was an article called How to Make Amazing Podcast Artwork. And it was more of like an interview. But just the first question of this, I'm approving a couple of links here in the chat, which apparently I have to do for everyone. But thanks everyone for including links. Emily is the Dave Jackson of the chat tonight.
She beat me to it. I went
every time she beat you to it, Dave. I don't think I approved one link from Dave Jackson. So
no, I by the time I copy it, I look and I'm like, there it is. I'm like, oh, never mind.
You know when the starting quarterback gets hurt and then you bring in the backup and the starting one never comes back? Welcome to your new show, Emily.
Yay. So I win at sports ball today.
you win at Roundtable ball, yes. No. All right. We'll just dock Dave's pay because we know that's a lot of money.
That's it.
So this first question he asked is, what's the job of a piece of podcast artwork? And these people, Nick Burns and Laura Walters, I'm not sure who they are. It's probably in the article. They said the job is first to convey the type of content you're going to experience, whether that's as broad as humorous, whether that's as broad as humorous versus technical, or it's as specific as the topic itself. The visuals need to communicate the tone and the content in a really quick glance. And there was a lead in about how, that it was kind of ironic that a lot of times with podcasts, people use their eyes before they use their ears because, and I've said this a lot, your podcast artwork might be that one chance to get someone to then press play or to read the description or go further, right? It's oftentimes a first impression that someone may have in an app, if you're using iTunes desktop, or maybe even like, who knows, Instagram, who knows where people find your artwork. But, and then Laura says, personally, I notice when podcast art isn't great. And I noticed when it is great. As a listener of podcasts, I really enjoy when the graphics are good and it encourages me to trust the publisher of the content and then keep exploring more of what they produce. So I think it is important to, again, putting your best foot forward to make a good first impression. I'm telling you, man, you could be like a terrible YouTuber, but if your very first 3 seconds is like super professional because you bought a motion graphic on whatever site, you're like, whoa, it leaves some impression. Now, 2 minutes in, I'm like, okay, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. I'm out of here. But that first impression may get people to stay that 2 minutes to actually check out your content to see if it's any good. So with your podcast artwork, to be honest, with this show, the Roundtable, I don't like it. I'm not a graphic designer. I made it myself. I think most of us independent podcasters make our own artwork. But what went into your artwork? Did you pay for it? Do you think it's important? Do you want to change it? Does anyone ever comment on it? I don't ever get comments on it, maybe because it sucks. But Emily, with your podcast artwork,
I feel like you're calling me out specifically because you remember my very first podcast artwork.
I do not. If I had a good memory, maybe, but my memory sucks. So there's nothing personal here. It's a random choice.
My very first podcast.
You're projecting, by the way.
I know. Oh, I'm so embarrassed by this. So my first podcast, it was called Classy Little Podcast. We talked about trivia and history over wine and cheese. My cover art.
Wait, does that not exist anymore?
Well, I stopped doing it.
Oh,
it's still out there.
Gotcha.
I'm begging people don't listen.
Yeah. I think for a long time that's how I knew you. I don't think I knew your name.
I know.
Like Classy Little Podcast. That's what I knew you as.
And that was the thing was, I remember tweeting the first time I met you at Podcast Movement. I'm like, oh my God, Ray Ortega just smiled at me. I wonder if he actually recognizes me or if he's waiting for a cat in a bow tie to appear, because that was my podcast cover art.
We did talk
That
about that, I
had
think.
nothing to do with wine or cheese or trivia. It was just, look at my cat. He's wearing a bow tie. And I'm so excited about this. No, it was terrible. Like, I made so many mistakes with that show that I love being able to tell people now. I'm like, here's what you don't do. Even though you have a really cute cat, don't put a bow tie on him and expect him to sell a podcast, because he won't. Finally, we added wine and cheese and like some trivia things into our podcast cover art. People realized, oh, okay, all right, I'm starting to get this. I'm starting to understand what this is. My podcast cover art now for the story behind was actually professionally designed by my publisher of the book, because they wanted to. I actually asked them, can you design my cover art to look like my book so that people see the book and they'll say, oh, that's Emily's show. That's her cover art. So they designed it for me. And before that, I designed it in Canva, but as long as you know the specs, and unless you're a podcast, I'm taking Daniel's hat right now. Unless you're a podcast about podcasting, I don't want to see microphones or headphones or any of those cliche things in your cover art. No.
Don't even do that if you're a podcast about podcasting, please. So, okay, what was important to you? What did you think of, first of all, Ginger, how did you create your podcast cover art for your first show? Did you steal the show's artwork?
Oh, Lord, no. Remember, there was no show when we started.
That's right.
It was only announced.
Yeah, but why would you knew something was coming. There had to have been.
Correct. But I'm saying we couldn't, there was nothing to steal.
Really? Like it was just like, we're going to start
Correct.
this. Oh, I'm surprised they would start a show without branding.
They may have had branding of like the font, like a lettering,
right?
But there was no like image. There was no show opening yet.
Gotcha.
So what we did was, and it's changed once in 5.5 years. What we did was the story of Outlander. In the first book, in the very beginning, part of the story takes place in Inverness. I studied many years ago. I studied in Scotland for a year. And I went on a trip to Inverness and I took a picture of the River Ness by night. And I sent the digital image to my sister, who painted that image. So we used the digital image of the painting of a digital image for Outlander. It was very pretty, and I still have it. Well, once the show came out and we saw what the actual opening sequence was, it was a standing stones and a sunrise and everything. My sister took that and painted that. So it's a very Monet impressionistic quality. But so she painted that.
What was your goal? So for me, it's funny because the Roundtable, speaking of Google and things they've killed, Google circles, doesn't exist anymore. The Roundtable it says Podcasters Roundtable. It's got the name of the show, and then there's a circle behind it. And it was because I built this show based on the tech, Google Hangouts on Air. I was like, I have friends, let's just talk about podcasting. And then I put them in circles because it was based on that whole concept. I just loosely based the artwork on it. And again, not much time spent on it. And I actually tried to put it on a shirt the other day to entertain the idea of a shirt. By the way, you're not getting a shirt anytime soon, but maybe SP is. SP's
5 more shows.
Yeah, I know. 5 more shows. So I better get on that design. It sucked on a shirt, by the way, so you're not getting that one.
Not happening.
No,
I have a picture of a cat you can use.
Perfect. That would really be amazing. And in fact, I figured it out. We're just going to use other people's podcast artwork. This is about other podcasts.
That's true.
We're going to use the artwork of other. That'll be cool. We'll do limited runs. We'll have like 100 shirts with cats on it. But this is going to be the best. Thanks. You just broke this wide open. So you might get a shirt in like 10 years.
Okay.
So anyways, so that's it. It conveys the name, and the letters are big. So hopefully you can see it in a small size. With the Podcaster Studio, again, it's got the name. It's had several iterations where I had my own name on it. It's got an XLR cable to sort of represent. So it's close to a microphone, but not quite. Dave, you are not a graphic artist.
I am not, and I've proven it time and time again.
What is your goal with podcast artwork when you create a new show? Because we know that's like every week there's a new show.
I usually make something in Canva and give it to a professional and go, this is what I'm thinking. Just make it look like it's not designed by somebody who's not a graphic designer. And so that's what I've done. I use podcast designs a lot. My last one I went to, I think it's Kappa 99. And what's kind of confusing about that service is their main bread and butter is you can hire them for hundreds of dollars a month, and they will just be your graphic people for everything you want, which is great, except I need them for one job. And if you go to the more button, you can get artwork for $50. So I've used them once.
I think that anyone starting a new podcast or getting into podcasting has a hard time with that. And that's why we get bad artwork that's created by ourselves. We're not graphic artists. What's the value in investing in your artwork?
First impression.
Yeah, first impression. So back to that first impression.
Yeah, I mean, you can't judge a book by a cover. Yes, you can. It's really easy. You look at that and go, wow, that's horrible.
The same thing that we sort of talk about how tech doesn't drive all these discovery things and different and being in the charts. And this doesn't really drive your audience. Does podcast artwork really make a difference, though?
For me, if I type in, whatever, pygmy ponies, and I see there's 3 pygmy pony podcasts, say that 3 times fast, and 2 of them have professional artwork and 1 doesn't, I know okay, now it's down to 2. At least for me. I don't know. What about you guys?
I think kind of going back to what I think Ray was saying about from the article he was talking about, part of the job, rightly or wrongly, part of the job of artwork of anything, a book, a podcast, a movie billboard, whatever it is to gain attention. And then once you have someone's attention, it's going to be, a positive or negative reaction. And negative doesn't necessarily mean bad, right? It just depends on what you're going for. But I agree with Dave. If I'm looking for something, especially by niche or topic, and a flurry of results come up, I'm likely gonna ignore the ones that are not pleasing to my eye.
Super amateur podcast artwork. If you're filtering if you're trying to figure out what do I listen to first, that first impression, like something super amateur, like could lead you to think, well, then why wouldn't the podcast be the same thing? Right. So I might try that podcast, that might not completely turn me off, but it might not be where I go first. And that other podcast then has an opportunity to sort of get your subscription. Right. And then you might be satisfied. Like if I'm looking for Westworld podcasts and I click on one and they're the people that I'm like, they're giving me what I want, I don't really have a reason to explore any other at Westworld podcasts per se. So I think related to that first impression, it's probably pretty important. For me, I always look at podcasts and I'm like, man, their branding has been the same since like day one and it's great. And now they do have shirts or cups or mugs. And I'm like, and it's all stuff that like I wouldn't mind displaying in public. You're like, I'd wear that shirt, or that coffee cup looks really cool and I love the show. I'm going to get that. So I think it's nice to be able to, if you have a professional design, what they can do for you oftentimes is make a design that looks good on other stuff. Like if you do get to the point where you're going to sell some merch, hopefully, and that's easy to do, you can go on all these third-party sites and put your logo on stuff. And I think, again, that's all of that sort of small move marketing, I made up that term, that we do as podcasters if we're trying to like generate any kind of income, but even beyond income, just something to give our audience. I've seen shirts of podcasts I love that are just like the massive, I'm like, I wouldn't look, I love the show. I'm not wearing that in public. It's bad. But so I think graphic first impressions are important for sure. But in terms of, if it's that first thing you see and you're judging by it, what information do you have on I think we all have our title, right? The title of the show. Although I am kind of curious, is it redundant? Is there a place where artwork exists where you also don't see a title? So like in iTunes, Apple Podcast, if I saw your artwork, the title of your show is going to be underneath it. It's kind of when I think of YouTube thumbnails. A YouTube thumbnail is another opportunity to tell me something more about the content because the title's right there. I know the title. If you repeat that on the thumbnail, it's a wasted opportunity. And I'm wondering, suddenly, could this have any impact on podcast artwork? Do you need to put the title? Is it redundant? Is there a place that exists for the majority of places you find podcasts where the artwork is just telling you again what the title is showing you right next to it? We all put our title.
thinking in my mind about, since I'm using my phone for this and I can't look at it and scroll through, thinking of times I've gone through looking for podcasts, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or on an app. You're absolutely right. The title is there, but it's so small compared to that graphic that I don't even, like, if I'm looking for those pygmy ponies, okay, then I'm not looking at the title of what comes up. I'm looking, okay, I've already put in my search parameter. What they gave me was the pygmy ponies. So these three I'm going to look at. Which one or two or whatever, you know, are not visually attractive at first. So then after I kind of saw something and dismissed it, then I might go say, okay, well, I wonder what this one's called. If it's not, you know, automatic. But I'm so, number one, I think the font comparably is so much smaller, or the type. Number two, I'm so conditioned to look at the image for the title. I don't think it's, I see what you're saying, and I'm wondering if it's a missed opportunity to do more, but I think we're conditioned at least to look at the image for the title, and it's just much bigger.
I have an example that I'm looking at on my phone. Hopefully the people in the video can see this. It's at the very bottom right. It's a red logo with a circle, and that's all it is. Now, if you were to see that, would you have any idea what that's about?
No.
That is something you're already subscribed to, right? Because
yes,
there's no way they're showing me that with no description title.
No.
Okay.
It looks like a hair braid or one of those things.
This is a Rorschach test, and Dave is
Yes.
telling us some interesting things.
Oh, a headband. A headband, you mean?
Yeah, no. It's an investing podcast.
What? I would have said like eclipse, some weird eclipse.
Yeah, no, it's an investing podcast that I really like. And it's nice and short, except for this random one that's 1,300 minutes for some reason. But for the most part, it's very short. And I don't understand their logo. And the thing is, whenever it comes up on my app, even though I've listened to it, I still have to check, wait, what podcast is this?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good example.
Pretty logo. Yeah. It's very pretty. But
I have one of my favorite shows change their artwork, and I was like, oh, it's terrible. Like, you're even screwing up my display in my app. What are you doing? Like, I took it personally. Don't mess up with my checkerboard, man.
I've been reading Don Miller's Story Brand, and he has a phrase: if you confuse, you lose. So yeah. I think that's the case, because I see people, what I love is they'll get the 3,000 by 3,000 artwork, not realizing that that's going to get shrunk down to like, God knows what, 75 by 75 or something like that. And so they'll cram all this information, you know, the School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com, plan, launch, grow your, and it's like, and then it gets shrunk down and you can't read any of it. So I always say, make the name of your show ginormous. And that way, when it does get shrunk down, hopefully they can see your name.
There was
next
some
to the
thread
microphone.
in our personal Slack recently about putting your face on cover artwork, and does that work?
Yeah.
And I had just done that, but it was only because I have a private Patreon podcast, so there was like nothing, didn't have a name. It was just like, this is a podcast. So like, it was the only case where people would recognize, like, my face was like this thing that people would know, like, that's Ray's podcast. Yeah, it's a private podcast. Like, there's no branding to it. Otherwise, I would never put my face on there. I mean, maybe if you're like a celebrity, right? Yeah. That might be a reason, but we're talking about like cliche things like mics, and like maybe if you know whatever you are, like the thing of your industry, like what do you put on there? But yeah, I mean, the information, the title of the show, and that it's big enough. Patrick Keller in the chat says artwork will determine a book he buys, and I'll say, I mean, how do you pick wine? All the time, people just pick by the label, man. Come on. It probably offends Emily, but
oh no, I picked by the label all the time. Exactly. I don't know what I'm picking out. I had a wine podcast. I don't know what I was talking
How would
about.
people know, right?
I don't like wines, but I am attracted to pretty bottles. But I drink whiskey, so I have very distinctive likes and dislikes. So I have to either research it or waste a lot of money.
Yeah. Do you listen to the Whiskey Cast?
I do not. I mean, I have, but I do not regularly.
Okay, I was going to say, because if you didn't know that exists, really great guy.
I will definitely. I have listened. I don't think I'm subscribed, but I will.
I
Yeah.
think I'm one of the few who like people's pictures on their podcast cover art. I don't necessarily recommend it as my number one recommendation, but I like it sometimes to put a face to that voice a lot of the times. Or some people will do a cartoon versions of themselves, and I'm usually like, oh, that's very sweet. I kind of like that.
I
You get
can't
a little
handle. I
bit.
can't stand cartoon versions of avatars because I'm like, I don't know who that is. Like, I don't know it's you. Like, I love face people who we're talking about faces. Let's just derail this. Not having a picture of you in your like Twitter avatar, I'm like, I don't ever really know who you are. Like, I need a face. Like in that case, like not a
Well,
picture of
on
your
social
cat.
media, when
Yeah.
how dare you? How dare
I mean,
you,
if
sir?
the cat is tweeting, fine. I know the cat, but I need to know its owner. I'm down. Like, get your own account, cat. Like, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
Emily, it's okay. I've got two. I have your back.
If
I'm
they
looking
have
for
their
them.
own
I'm
Twitter
like,
account, then
he will yell at you.
I am
Oh.
cool with cats, dude. That's not
Mine
what I'm
are
saying.
locked up on purpose because when I do this, we do live after shows after a new episode of Outlanders on the air, and oh my, yeah, they will either be all over me or knock over lights, and so yeah, no, mine have to be locked up.
Patrick also says, isn't the face on album artwork kind of an old school thing? All the dead podcasts from 10 years ago have faces. Do you remember that being a thing, Dave? Was everyone putting their face on a podcast artwork? How about
I don't remember that.
Along the same trends, what do you remember? Since Dave has been here before podcast started, he's just waiting. Dave was like, I have a podcast. I'm waiting for them to develop access.
Was all the cover art in black and white, Dave?
It was all black.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it was.
Until it was invented.
Oh,
we now have podcasts in color.
Have you
Yes.
have you seen anything change, Dave? Like, was there something you remember, like podcast artwork being? I mean, it was probably just all homemade in the beginning. Now
Yeah, I'm gonna say I remember a lot of Microsoft Paint, kind of like, wow, that's
Which
was that done in
old is
crayon?
new again? That would be awesome artwork.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it was homemade, and then eventually, upgraded. They finally figured it out that maybe we should let somebody who actually does this for a living, create that. I don't remember a lot of faces though. I remember, and it was always kind of like extreme in many cases. Like if it was a heavy metal,
like more
music,
than words extreme, or
no, like just like if it was like a heavy metal thing, it was like things were on fire and
blood
devil
and fire
horns and like it was just like so everything seemed to be, and if it was
a lot of stuff crammed into probably a very small space.
Yes, yeah, because that's back when, God, think about that. Album art used to be 300 by 300.
That's back when nerds were making podcast artwork, and they wanted all their nerd stuff on there, and I'm including myself.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, we've probably beat all these horses. We don't beat any. No horses were beat in the making of the Roundtable.
No, and no cats. And no cats were injured.
Definitely no cats.
Or insulted, Ray.
Not insulted. I'm just get the cat its own Twitter account.
Mine, but no one else can.
Right.
I look forward to tweeting your cat.
Oh gosh.
We'll DM. Kidding.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get out of here. Let's tell everyone where they can find one of our podcasts. And thanks for being on the show, Dave Jackson.
You can find me over at schoolofpodcasting.com.
So much like I said, are we wasting an opportunity on our artwork? Are we doubling up on the thing that's already there? Title on our artwork, title and description. You see both those. Dave went with the very same thing he opens the show with. So I think you missed opportunity there, Dave. But you're just nailing it home. You're just sending it home.
That's it. I'm just trying to get it ingrained.
That's right. People have to hear things like 7 times before they actually.
When you think podcasting, think schoolofpodcasting.com.
School of podcasting.
Yeah.
Dave also just found a cheap way to get an extra plug-in. All right.
Yes.
It's all right. Just co-host, will give him a little leeway. Emily, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm at thestorybehindpodcast.com, which I said in the beginning of the show, because when people heard me in the beginning, they didn't know who I was. Maybe they want to follow me and my cat now.
Now they like you. Before they're like, who's this woman?
I'll put plenty of cat pictures on Instagram, and you can find that at my website too. So.
You claim to be 5 away from a shirt. Have you been on this show 5 times? I don't buy that, actually.
I think
can't be
either
right.
4 or 5.
You're just guessing. Is what you're just randomly throwing out numbers, hoping to be closer to 10.
Okay, Ray. Ray.
Just
You and
asking.
me tonight.
Just asking. Just a question. Just trying to find out. Because my whole point is, again, how many times you have to hear the story behind, right? Get it in there. It's branding. You got to say it again and again and again. All right. She's checking on that, by the way. We got to get out of here before she discovers a real number and finds out it's 9. And Ginger, thanks for joining us for your first ever roundtable.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Where should we find your podcast?
At very original outlanderpod.com.
Just pod. I like it.
Yeah.
Why not podcast?
Well, actually, I can answer that. So when we did start, I tried to get all the social media handles before we went live.
Yeah.
And
your launch before you launched.
Before we launched, yes. And so went live, before we put anything out there or started talking about it. And I think I was on Twitter first, and it is literally like 2 or 3 characters too much. I was like, damn it. So I didn't want to use these. So I said, okay, it has to have Outlander because that has to be there. Podcast. And I wasn't very knowledgeable yet about what other podcasts do in their name. I know it's some are pod, some are cast, some are podcast. And I'm like, you know what? Keep it pod. Keep it the beginning of the word. So once we got Twitter as Outlander Pod, I wanted to be consistent as much as possible. So we got our URL, our domain for outlanderpod.com.
Yeah, as much as you can keep the brand the same thing everywhere, it's so much better. Like, I don't have that anymore. I mean, like, ideally, I'd be Ray Ortega everywhere. I mean, I'm podcast helper on most places because I couldn't get Ray Ortega everywhere, only because of Twitter and the Ray Ortega that's holding his hostage doesn't do anything with it. That's Twitter's fault. Anyways, not bitter. All right. Well, yes, that's a good advice. Try to match your branding. It just makes it easier for your audience if they know. They're like, well, I follow Outlander Pod on Instagram. Maybe that's their Twitter handle. Turns out it is. Congrats, you found me. All right. Thanks, everyone. Podcastersroundtable.com/guest. If you want to be on a roundtable, that'll put you on the list. It'll ask you some things you want to talk about. We don't do that anymore. It doesn't matter. You should have to do work before you get on the show. And then I'll contact you about 5 hours before we go live. And if you're available, we'll bring you on. That's how it works. Very informal. Thanks. We'll see you next time. You must wave goodbye. Adios.
Bye. Bye.
Whoa, I almost hung up. I do that wrong. I've done that so many times. Keep waving, Ray.